So I don't personally have a lot of progress to report. The only progress I've made at the moment is I'm reaching over for my Pelican case or my Pelican knockoff case. Uh, so Jeff has access to better machining stuff than I do, so I have to do stuff out of wood. So I know you probably are not going to be able to see this, but so I've got the GPS and the RPI in the bottom, and I was going to put my power on the top. So I've got this USB deal, right? So I was going to put that there and then put my 12 volt distribution box with the blade fuses there. And that's the painfully small amount of progress that I've made. I did find, I thought I would share with you, let me pull it up on Amazon. I had purchased, I think, the blade fuse holder that Matt, you had used, and then I was cruising Amazon and found this one. And what I liked about it is the positive was down here and fused, and then you also had a negative bar up there, because what I had, the other one, maybe there was a better way to handle it, but I had a grounding bar separate, and I just think this will be a little bit cleaner.
That's a nice addition.
Yeah, so so not much progress, but a little, and that's what where I've been at. I had to order those reverse polarity coaxials because Jeff was right that the Wi-Fi adapter that I had bought needed reverse polarity SMA. What they refer to as reverse polarity, I think that's a little bit of a misnomer, but they call it reverse polarity cables.
I think that's a really slick Wi-Fi addition for $10. I actually bought some surface mount of those UFL connectors, really teeny tiny ones, and then you can solder that to the Raspberry Pi board. And then that will give you an external antenna out. So you're just using the Wi-Fi chip that's on there. You just solder that little connector down to the board. But I haven't done that hack yet. And the Wi-Fi seems, I mean, just the USB Wi-Fi, that's really smart.
Huh. So there's enough space on the RPi to take one of those antenna connectors and hack it into the RPi.
Yeah, you have to cut open a trace on the Raspberry Pi board, and then you solder that on there, and then that gives you an external antenna plug. That's the other way that I've seen do it, but definitely having an external antenna, I think that's smart's way to go. You're ahead of the game in the hardware there in that area.
Oh, and I wanted to take a picture of the guy and send it to you. I happened to be at an AT&T conference. I'm looking for the picture. Happened to be at an AT&T conference, and they had 3 CFOs up on stage doing one of the morning sessions, and the guy opens up he used to be a big big wig at PepsiCo, and now he's the CEO for Albertsons. And I didn't actually know the name, but I guess they own Safeway grocery stores. And he starts off talking about markets and immediately jumps into, yeah, and let me use grass-fed beef as an example. We love it, and it's great, and we make more money, and consumers will pay more money for it. And he was going on and on and on about grass-fed beef, and I'm like, this is unexpected but very cool.
It's like $10 a pound to market.
Crazy. So anyway, I thought you would enjoy that. A CEO for a grocery store chain was, out of all of the things he could have used as a topic, he decided to talk about grass-fed beef at
You're starting to
technology conference.
Yeah, they say the cow, they're going to, I don't remember the date, but they expect 50% of it to be replaced here in the future. But it's funny. Grass-fed beef is going to hold on for sure.
Yeah, and Peter, I think, do you belong to Peter Diam? How do you say his last name?
Demandus.
Yeah, he was one of the speakers too, so he gave his pitch about we're all going to be cyborgs in 20 years.
Yeah, he's definitely a futurist.
But that was cool.
That is cool. We got to get the cow tractor out running around. We can do it. It's possible.
Yeah, but now we'll just have to say, see that snow plow? I'm going to replace that with something that cuts grass and delivers it to the cows.
So I found a little small micro tractor for like $2,500. It's got like a tiller and plow, a couple other things, attachments, little small tractor.
Do we have photos?
You want to see the little guy? It's 15 horsepower.
Absolutely. Who makes it?
It's Mitsubishi. I haven't taken a look at it, but it's a 4x4 diesel.
Diesel. That's cool.
Yeah. But I thought that looks pretty close to the one we have in the simulator. It's just a little.
It looks other than the color, it looks exactly like it.
So we could modify that. That's the tiller. It's got a brush hog, which is nice. Field mowing, little disc, plow, and a sprayer. So that would take a pretty good chunk of tasks. I mean, obviously not moving the cow tractor around, but it would do spraying. You could do some disking, brush mowing for sure, tilling.
He doesn't mention the number of hours. Have you been there?
I haven't. It was, he says this is from an estate leftover.
It says low hours.
Yeah, it needs work, hard starting and but I thought that was funny, for what it's worth.
Does it say power steering?
It doesn't. Yeah. That's the other thing is I don't know what it would take to automate it, but I'm sure we could put the electric power steering there to control the steering. I don't know how to interface into the clutch or the shifter, but hopefully those 200K kilogram servos might be able to employ some of those. I've been pretty impressed with how much power they have, and they just seem to run okay. Pretty easy interface.
Yeah, and I will tell you on my, John Deere tractor, my expectation was not to try to automate the transmission shifting, but to just manually put it in gear, at least be able to put the clutch in and put the brake in just to keep it stable, but then put it in gear and let it go. Other than obviously being able to stop it. And the linear servos worked fine for that. So, yeah, I think you could.
They sell a rake for these things and a baler, so
For really for something that size.
a little ridiculous.
No, it would be cool because it's been my experience. Once, if you do the job more often, you don't need as big a machine, right? Um, if, and if it's automated and you're not trying to optimize for the cost of the guy driving it, um, I think it opens up wonderful options. I wonder if they still make that thing though.
I don't know. It's older. Getting parts and things should be
Yeah,
on like a collector type deal.
yeah, it'd be a little bit of a challenge.
I've looked at the Kubota. The Kubota makes the auto steering on some of their smaller tractors, and so a Kubota with auto steering would be a nice. I don't know what the next step up, but
I took another picture I was going to post and then just never got around to it. I was at a Home Depot and they had how do you say it? Yanmar?
yeah,
Is that that's the manufacturer that Kyler likes, right? Because it's
yeah,
easy to. Um,
about 3,500 to get into their baseline tractor, or
yeah,
35,000. Sorry.
they had a Yanmar 424 with a front loader and a backhoe on it at Home
Nice.
Depot. Yeah, I mean, they were renting them obviously, and it was just interesting to see that Yanmar had struck a deal with Home Depot and using that to get into the market, right? To get their name out there.
I definitely like the front loader. I totally want to get a front loader again. I think it adds a lot more complexity moving things around, but it's a lot more fun too, controlling that arm.
And speaking of controlling that arm, did you talk to the Move It guys?
Yes, Dave Coleman. Yep. Okay, so they did have a workshop, but it's pretty technical. So I haven't actually ran an arm with it. I did talk with Dave Coleman, likes Ross Agriculture, thinks there's some cool stuff we can do there with robotic arms.
Simulator? Did they talk about a simulator?
They do have the simulator. Yeah, Move It has a good simulator. Yeah. For simulation, so robot. So the Open Robotics has been working a lot with Gazebo 9 and Ignite. So they're trying to redo kind of the functionality of Gazebo, make it more lightweight, add more complex game-like simulations. Weebots is another one. They have open source their simulator, and they have some pretty cool ag simulations. And then I talked to a guy out of Europe, and they're using Unity. And so it's kind of pluses and minuses for all of that, but we're pretty close to having a gazebo simulation from the Olin Robotics. Our same little lawn tractor has a gazebo side, so we could roll that out. But for the machine learning part, I was looking really towards Unity, just because the lifelike images are pretty cool. So we can get a camera feed back out of Unity and then feed that into our ROS pipeline, our perception pipeline.
And so I'm not familiar with Unity. I'm just Googling it.
It's a game engine.
It's a what?
It's a game engine. So there's Unreal and Unity are kind of the two big game engines right now for 3D content.
And so it's a competitor to Gazebo in effect.
Well, yeah, they kind of do a little bit different things, but yes, you can use
Unity and Gazebo. You would just use
Unity. Yep. Now, if we're kind of still in the planning phase of this, we still have a lot of work to do around the planner, and all of that you can use with Stage. Like, you don't need 3D world environment to do planning. So we're still good to use the stage for planning, for simulation, that type of thing. But if you want to get into more advanced simulations, we'll need to go to Gazebo or do some other one. Like if we put a robotic arm on these little lawn tractor and try to go out and do picking or try to do some interacting with things, then we'll want to have some other simulator to do that portion.
And just to clarify, if you were placing bets, you would say Unity would be a part of that stack.
Man, it's unknown right now. I know that the changes they did in Gazebo 9 have been very good. They've been a lot of improvements on Gazebo. The reason I was looking towards Unity is the lifelike images. And so if we want to do like row detection, so we could have like a row of plants, crops, and then we'll bring the vehicle in there, it will output the images. And then we can use different algorithms to try to stay or keep our vehicle within the row or identify those plants, plant versus weeds, do different things. Those are kind of the two goals for the perception team, is plants versus weed distinction, and then be able to follow rows.
Cool. Anything else going on in your world that you want to share?
A lot of fun, more robots.
Oh, I was going to ask it. So if you're, shopping for tractors, then
Yeah.
Have you closed on your West Coast farm yet?
I haven't closed on the farm yet. I am rocking 3 acres of pretty diverse terrain. So a small little lawn tractor I could play around with. I haven't recorded the path through the trees. I want to drive the lawn tractor through the trees, but it's pretty narrow, very narrow. I don't know if it'll be possible, but I got to get out there and do a recording before the snow comes. It's still cold in the mornings. I mean, it's getting down in the 20s, but as long as we don't have snow, I can get up and drive through there, take a recording to show.
Brr.
Yeah, burr, 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 which makes it hard to go out and do testing, but I gotta mount. I don't have the right mounting plate for that plow. I have a front snow plow for the lawn tractor. I need to make a mounting bracket and then get out there and practice. With that, I don't really know, just start in the center and then spiral out, so you're constantly pushing the snow out. It doesn't throw the snow, just pushes it around. But
So did you buy a blade?
yeah, just a blade. Yep.
Oh, okay. Do they make a motorized snowblower?
Yep. Yep.
What do those go for?
New, I think they're 1,500. I want to say around there. Used, I've seen them down around $500-$700. Yep.
We're talking about something that'll go on the Cub Cadet, right?
Yes, they go on the lawnmowers. Yep. Yep. So you take that sprocket on the bottom that goes back to your lawnmower, and that goes forward to your snowplow. That same spinning spindle on the bottom.
You add an additional.
You just unhook your deck blade, and then
redirect the power.
Yep. Which looks pretty cool. I've just heard you have to have the right amount of snow and the right type of snow to be able to get those blowers to blow it, those bigger size ones. Or be moving fast enough, I don't know.
For your blade, check out the Ion snowplow competition, because they're restricted to using a blade on whatever vehicles they got. Those are either on YouTube or Vimeo or somewhere like that. So you can see the different strategies people use on that to move their snow.
Ion is an ION?
Yes.
Autonomous snowplow competition.
Yeah, that's the one.
Oh, I think I saw these guys last year. Don't they do it downtown Minneapolis, as I recall, don't they?
Well, it was in downtown St. Paul And then last year they put it in somewhere in Canada. It might have been Montreal or Toronto or somewhere. So I don't know if they're going to alternate back and forth now, but the one last year was in somewhere in Canada. And there's going to be one coming up pretty quick here. So I think it's in January, February, I think is when they do it. And we've had just a little bit of snow. There was enough to cover the grass one day, but it was all gone then by the afternoon.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I'm looking at the picture at the bottom of the homepage, and it's got Dunwood on it, and it looks like they have an ice castle built behind them.
And if you dig far enough there, you can find that they've got, previous years, they've got links to videos. Otherwise, just go to like YouTube and search for Ion snowplow competition. It'll probably show up there. And I don't know if they're on YouTube or Vimeo, or maybe it's just up to the team to wherever they want to post their own.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of blades, not.
Yeah, they have a restriction on that. You can't do a snowblower. You have to use blades on.
Have to use blades. Oh, okay.
At least up till last year. I don't know if this last year they let them do something different or not. I think eventually they're going to switch and let them start doing more. But for years and years, the restriction was you had to put a blade on the thing, and you could not use a snowblower.
Cool. Jeff, what's going on in your world?
Well, I got several things. As I was posting on those pictures on the group, and I showed off on the last week's or last Tuesday's weekly meeting, I showed the front end. I took the front end off my tractor and replaced the Super Servo 200 with this the one I got from MPJA. And I was showing that, and had the little knob. I was showing that moving back and forth. And then I think the next night, I got that bolted back onto my mini tractor, and I knew that the centering wasn't correct, and I had some big elaborate plans. I was going to hook a potentiometer up to my board so I could run the thing back and forth, and then have it dump out on the serial port what the numbers were going to the servo. And I thought, well, I'll go all the way left and write it down, all the way to the right, and then go back to the center and write that down. And the more I thought about it, all I could do is, I thought, if I just take the number going to the servo and print it out on the serial interface, and then just turn it on and use my existing system. So I just take the remote control and move it to center as opposed to where it was. And I just wrote that number down, went back and punched that in the code, and that seemed to solve all my problems right there. So it's pretty well centered now. And this one it's much more responsive than the other one was. And the other one, I'd move the joystick back and forth, and it'd kind of, I'd think about moving over, and it would just sluggishly go to where I wanted to. It took it a while to decide it was going to do that, and it wouldn't hold the position. If I'd run it all the way to the left, it seemed to be, it'd get towards the end, it didn't want to keep tracking out there. But this new one, it seems to, if I move the joystick, it follows it, but it just makes a lot of noise, so it's a lot noisier. The original Servo 200 made noise, but this makes more noise, and it's more obvious that it's has more gain, and the tracking is working much better. And then the other thing was, I decided I was going to put since I lost my cell phone connection, I decided to use the Swift Nav radios, so I'm going to have a laptop. And so I set this all up. I had it all set up last night, and I've got a laptop, and one of the radios set up as the transmitter, and I had that connected to my laptop here on the table. So I would use the RTK Live software. So I would say connect to the internet, get the correction data, and send it out the serial port. So that gives me a complete base station. And then on my robot, I screwed one of those receivers to the side of that, and I've just got a little RS-232 cable. I had to make a null modem male-to-male cable. And then I got a little like RS-232 to TTL converter that's taped on there. And then I just had to run some jumper wire from that to my U-Blox F9P receiver. And I thought I had everything all set up. It's just going to work great. I turned it on, nothing. I couldn't get anything out of it. And in the process, I found out I bought these little adapters on eBay one time, and for some reason, this particular one does not seem to work under Linux. Because first problem I had, I was trying to get that laser scanner to work, so I had one of these plugged into a Raspberry Pi, and it wasn't working. But I swapped it out with a different one, and then that seemed to be working. So last night I found out on my laptop this also was causing me problems, and it looks like it's it doesn't understand the baud rate change. So you say set it to a baud rate, and that's not actually working. So I have to remember not to use these on Linux anymore because they just don't seem to be working. So that was one of my problems. Another problem was I had some random serial cable, like a serial extender cable, and I thought it looked just like a, male to female cable like you would use. So I put that on there. Well, it turns out that cable doesn't work. So it's either a null modem or totally wired differently or whatever. So I took that out of the loop, and I finally got to the point where I could send data from my laptop over to my robot, and I could actually go into the uBlocks setup software and see, it says, here's the incoming RTCM messages. And they were showing up, but I noticed they were kind of randomly showing up. They weren't coming out in nice blocks like they're supposed to. And then down at the bottom, it said most of them were failing CRC. So that's kind of where I left it. I thought, well, something in between there. One of these pieces is not sending in data completely correct, but it's good enough that the receiver understands those as RTCM correction messages, so that's a good sign. So the last thing I did, I thought, well, I'll hook the laptop directly to the, so I had the laptop with the serial cable plugged into the RS-232 to TTL converter on the robot, and thought, okay, that's a direct connection, and I can't get that to talk at all either, so it's either, again, it's problem with null modem versus no null modem or something like that. So that's where I went. I decided to go home at that point last night. So, and another thing I noticed on these the Swift Nav radios, when I first was playing with them originally, I went through their instructions. Said I built a base station which I put out behind the building, and then put the I think a receiver on my car or something, and then I'd drive around the building, and I noticed I'd get about 3/4 of the way around the building, and I'd lose the signal from this radio. And it's mainly because I got the big building in between me and the transmitter. And then I later found out that you can go into the radio and you can change it from 100 milliwatt output to 500 milliwatts output. So you can crank it up by a factor of 5 on the power. So I did that also, and that might be causing some problems right now. The fact that I'm, got my two radios 10 feet apart, it could be that with the extra power, that's causing problems with that. So I got lots of things I can try to track down. So that's kind of where I'm at on that project. And then also I was talking about the that Hemisphere GPS receiver, which was this one. And I went out and put that on my car and drove around with it, and it seemed to be giving me data. And I thought, well, I should go into this. I didn't even do any setup on it. I just simply plugged it in and fired up their software and said start logging. So I didn't have to go through and do a lot of configuration or anything. And I went out and drove around. It seemed to be working like it's supposed to. So yesterday went back and looked at the configuration software. I thought, well, I'll try to turn the correction on or off and see what that does. And I noticed I can't seem to do anything. I can't seem to make any changes to it. So it could be that I just can't. You order it a certain way, and that's the way it's going to be. So that's kind of one of the things I'm going to look at right now, is try to figure out, how you do that. Because I'd like to say it's got this Atlas correction that I think they say it's 10 centimeter correction, and I would like to be able to turn that on and off and see how that affects the thing. And then it's also got this SBAS correction, which that's just one of the fundamental things you can get with GPS, and you should be able to turn that on and off too. And I can't seem to do any of that. So it's going to be interesting to play with that and see what I can make that do. But I was getting to the point where I've got I got a new frame put on top of my robot now. So it's,
oh my gosh.
And it turns out that antenna on the front is actually, that's the one I just bought from Arju Simple. They had it on sale through yesterday. It was on sale where you can get that. You can get the antenna and a 2.5 meter cable for $88, I think it was. And then while I had the trunk open, I bought some of those screw-in adapters that converts the 5/8 inch down to 1/4 inch. And then I got these other. Here's one right here. I bought the some stands for it, so it's This thing I think was $20 for that, and then the little brass inserts that convert the size, I think those were like $11 a piece. So since I was ordering parts, and the problem is we have some of those adapters that came with the Swift Nav stuff, and every time somebody sends this stuff out to a customer to play with, when it comes back, all the accessories are always missing. So we keep losing those things, and I ended up making some by hand. So you go to the hardware store and buy a 5/8 inch bolt that's like 3 or 4 inches long. You have to clamp it on a vise and take a hacksaw and cut it off so it's got 1/2 inch of thread sticking out, and then you got to put it in a drill press, drill a hole down through the center of it, and then tap that for 1/4 inch. So you can make your own, but it's a real pain. It just takes forever. And I thought since I was ordering stuff, I went ahead and ordered 2 of those. So I've got 2 for because the antenna I got from China and the one I got from Madrid, Spain, from RG Simple, neither one of those come with an adapter. So I need to have either you got to put a 5/8 inch bolt up to bolt it in, or this stand actually has it's threaded on the top, and then the bottom has something smaller. I don't know if looks like it's about a 3/8 inch. One end's like tapped for 3/8 inch, and then this one is the big one that goes into the bottom. That's just the standard. These on GPS antennas for whatever reason. So the base is just a little plastic, and it's got a magnet in it too. So I assume it's to stick on top of your car or whatever. I haven't tried putting on the car, but that's something I can try one of these days. So anyway, I ordered that, and I replaced because I had one of the company Swift Nav antennas on the front of my robot. So now I've got my own stuck on there. So both of those on there are my parts. And I keep trying to think, what other parts belong to work that I have to replace? Well, now I got the Swift Nav radios I'm trying to run. So I either have to replace those with the 3DR radios, or I've got I got some boards that are similar to these, similar to the Swift Nav ones that a guy gave me a long time ago. And if I go through and figure those out, that may work for that also. So anyway, that's what I've been doing this week, and I don't know if there's any other really major things that I can tell you about, but that's kind of where I'm at on that.
Every one of those are boulders in your road that you've had to move to the other side of the road.
Yeah.
That GPS mounting stuff, though, that looks like a 3D printing problem to me.
Well, that's very possible.
Because all things can be fixed with a 3D printer.
Now, so. on my frame that I made, would you have 3D printed that big frame on top? I used wood to do that. So, but
yeah, there's another
big enough 3D printer, I guess you could have printed that from scratch and made that up. So.
On the GPS stand, though, the ones that I had as well, because I think when I bought one of mine, I ended up with a similar base as you've got. There's not a lock washer on that. Do you ever get concerned that that thing will vibrate out of there?
It might. So you could either put some Loctite on it or put a lock washer, or I haven't used this at all yet. The one thing that did occur to me one day, in fact, on the Hemisphere one, where I just made this aluminum bracket, because see, it's got this cable sticking out the bottom, so I have to have something to hold it up higher than that. So I just bought these magnets at Harbor Freight, and you just bolt them on. And I just had this stuck on the top of my car, and I wasn't really thinking about it. I was out driving down the interstate with it, and I thought, hey, what if that blows off the top of my car? Now, when I get the other antennas are down low, but this one's up high enough, it's just kind of like a sail up there. So that might be a problem. So I thought, well, I better think about it a little harder before I do that again. And the thing is, the interstate runs right by us out here. We've got the back parking lot, and then a spot of grass on the other side of the fence is the interstate. So I just have to drive north or south to get one of the entrances to it, so I can drive up and down at highway speed. And that's where I was doing that. I thought, uh-oh, what if that blows off there? So that's something I had.
But it did stay on.
It did. Yeah. So far, nothing's blown off my car doing any of this stuff.
Yeah, that would definitely do some finish damage at least. And how did you keep those magnets from messing up the finish on your car?
I didn't. I just stuck it on there. I put it up on the roof, so you can't see if it scratches up. You can't see it anyway. So I didn't worry about it. If I put it on my hood, that'd be a different story. But
That's a great, I love that. I love that mentality. Like, just get it done.
Well, if you're worried about your car enough that you worry about something like that, then you shouldn't be using it for that in the first place. So,
Matt, anything else going on you want to comment on?
Looks good, Jeff. Need to
The
get
other
set
thing
up.
that go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to take us in a different direction here. I haven't had time to look at their code, but uh, some time ago, I think Sohan was the first one that mentioned these guys that I can recall. These comma.ai guys. Do you remember them, or do you recall? They've
Yeah.
effectively got this $600 Android phone that they've loaded up with. It's not clear to me whether they're actually doing lane detection with this, or this has just simply via CAN connected into the ODB of a certain select group of cars that already have lane assist.
They're doing it on board there. It's vision.
You think they're doing all the processing on board and not just using the lane assist for the group of cars that they're hooked into?
It's vision based, so they just use the camera off of there.
Mm.
Yeah, I made an early Eon about 2016 when they open sourced it.
What? I'm sorry. What did you do, Matt?
I built one of these early on, like 2016.
And did you? I mean, so were you able to get it to drive your vehicle?
Not totally, but we were kind of doing a different approach. We started a self-driving car meetup down in Austin, Texas, and I was automating a Kia Soul. So the open source control kit you can buy out of Portland, and they'll let you have a couple pieces of hardware, and that lets you get full control over a Kia vehicle. And then you can use this Neon to drive it around. But Comma AI is doing some cool stuff. For $1,000, it's pretty cool. And it's all done at they're using a OnePlus phone, and that gives you access to the RAM, so you can load directly your software right onto the phone. And then the Snapdragon processor on the phone is what they're doing the training or their model prediction from their machine learning pipeline from the camera.
Snapdragon is the platform that they're using?
It's the processors from Qualcomm
Oh.
that runs on.
Did you ever look at their code?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, so anyway, I spent a little bit of time educating myself on these guys and was just curious what was actually going on the phone versus leveraging this lane assist and other stuff that was already built into the cars.
Yeah, so they can bring in some of the sensors if your car has those sensors like the radar and things like that.
Jeff, part of the reason I wanted to mention it is because they talk CAN, right? The stuff that you get with these guys is connected into the ODB2, and so it's open source, and so I didn't know if there was anything that you could, I don't know, be interested in or learn from as far as how they've hooked into the CAN on the vehicle.
another thing you have to consider on that is that you look at your ODB2 connector, and it's got 1 or 2 CAN buses, and it's got depending what vehicle you got. Mine's based on Chevy, and they've got one or two of their own standard buses. So just because you have that connector on there doesn't necessarily mean it's CAN like normal people use. Some of them are. So if you get the newer ones, they probably have a real CAN bus, and you can talk to it directly with, plug in your Kavasar interface and talk to it that way. But like on my car, mine seems to have all the cheapest pieces they can put on. So I don't think I have an actual CAN bus on my car, but it's got these other buses for talking to, connecting things together, and I don't have all the fancy. I don't even have anti-lock brakes on my car. And somebody said, "Oh, it has to. Because of the year, it has to have it." Well, it does not have those on there. So, things like that you run into. But if you get a modern, more expensive car to start with, it's probably going to have something that you can tie into some of that stuff. And I'm not sure how much, just because it has a CAN bus, it may not have like if you get a car that's smart enough to park itself, probably you could actually control the steering and the transmission and the gas pedal and everything over you may be able to do it over CAN bus. Yeah, see down there, they're saying 3X CAN, 2 LAN, 1 GM LAN. And see, mine's got a GM LAN on my car. And so depending what you're connecting it to, don't assume your car has CAN. You can do whatever you want with it until you look at it a little harder.
Yeah, the only reason I was mentioning it is because I thought they somewhere in all of their code, they've figured out some of what you're just talking about, I think. And anyway, I thought it was interesting what they're doing, because they do have a very select group of models. It's broadening, certainly, that they're able to talk to, but it tends to be Toyota, Honda. They do interface with a Cadillac. So they've got a set group of guys that have figured out. Anyway, just thought that was interesting. Okay, guys. Jeff, anything else to comment on?
Not that I can think of.
Matt, what's on your to-do list for this weekend?
Unpack. Get my parts out, my electronics out.
How's your jet lag?
It was a little weird, actually. Coming back was a lot worse than going over for some reason, but I don't know. I slept on their time zone and slept on my time zone a few days.
So you're over it now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well,
I did have one more comment. I was playing with the Raspberry Pi and the power sequencing and all that, and I tried at least one of those examples where they said just hook up a push button to your Raspberry Pi, and sure enough, you can make that work if you hook up the push button. And the thing I didn't realize is that a Raspberry Pi by default, if you just shut it down to the point where you go into Linux and say shut down, or go to the screen and say shut down that way, it shuts all the way down to the point just your red LEDs on. If you don't remove power from it, there's 2 pins on the board. If you short those 2 pins together, it wakes back up and turns back on. So what they did was they used those 2 pins, and so you hook your push button up to those, and then once it gets started, then they have a script that starts up in the background, and it's essentially watching those 2 pins. So if the thing's running and you hit the push button, it executes the shutdown command and goes all the way down to the point where you just got the red light on. If you hit the push button again, it wakes it back up and comes back on. So you get just a push button on there allows you to turn your Raspberry Pi on and off. And for instance, say you take it down all the way and then you kill the main power. Well, as soon as you put the main power back on, then the Raspberry Pi will go ahead and boot up and run. So that's probably something worth considering, putting on there, because now you've just got a push button. You can push it and it'll shut down. So you're not just yanking the power on the thing. And I was surprised that it did actually work, and it seemed to work fairly well once I got it figured out.
So Jeff, is your plan to use kind of like that STM as the master, and it will listen for voltage or listen for your boot up sequence, and then that will turn on your Raspberry Pi?
I will probably add something external to the Raspberry Pi because I didn't just simply want a push button on there. For my stuff, I wanted it so um, one, it could watch your main power switch. So you walk up to it and, like say in your car where you get in, put the key and turn the key on, simply watch for that. And that's the way that little, here's one right here, that little box from minibox.com. It's got a cable that you plug into it and it monitors your ignition switch, but it then connects your power directly to the battery. So it's smart enough that when you get in and turn your key on, it turns on its output. And so say you're putting out 12 volts and you drive around all day, and then when you get done, you go to turn the key off and it detects your ignition switch turned off, and it's set up so you can send a pulse out to, they want you to run like one of the mini ITX type computers. So it's got, a switch situation there. And I suppose you could run the same thing like on the Raspberry Pi, just switch it directly. But the whole point is this has a microcontroller built into it. So I was just going to get like one of the little Arduino boards, the little
Nano.
yeah, one of those type things, and just have it do that same kind of thing. So it can watch my power switch. When I turn the power switch on, it'll say, oh, okay, it would enable my 5-volt converter that would then power the Raspberry Pi, so it'll bring it up. And then if you either decide to say somebody turns the power switch off, then it would detect that, and it would send the signal to the Raspberry Pi and tell it to do its shutdown, and then keeps track. Once it's all the way down, then it can kill the 5-volt converter. So I was thinking about adding that, and that by having the extra processor in there, that means if for some reason you go out to the you're in the Linux environment and you execute a shutdown command from the command line, they'll take a Linux all the way down and kill the power. But if you got this extra little processor, it'll say, oh, gee, it just shut everything down, so we can go ahead and turn the power off at that point. So either way, you can either do it. I was thinking about putting a switch on and have it either called the development mode or the consumer mode. So in development mode, it's up to you to say, okay, now turn the power on. So you have like a power up request button and a power down request button. So the microcontroller would watch those and control the switching converter, and send it could communicate with the Raspberry Pi and decide what to do next. And then if you put it in the consumer mode, so basically then it just watches your ignition switch. So when you turn the main power on, it boots up your Raspberry Pi, and then when you're all done, if you just turn the switch off, it'll send the correct stuff to the Raspberry Pi and tell it to shut down. And then when it's all shut down, then it kills the 5-volt converter, so all your power turns off. So I don't have this all figured out, but I'm kind of at the point now where I'm just realizing that I'm about ready to take my thing outside to test all my GPS receivers and drive it around. And I realize, well, I don't have a way to power my Raspberry Pi, so at the moment I'll probably put one of those USB charging batteries on there again, because that's just a quick way to, I can just plug it in and hit the button on that to power it up, and then when I'm done, just shut it down that way. So I need to start thinking about how I'm going to do that. But I'm just going to one of the little 5-amp switching converters you buy on eBay. And if you look hard enough, you can find there's at least one of them that has an enable pin on it. So you don't have to have extra switching anywhere else. You just got, it's like a TTL logic level on this converter. So that if I hook my little Arduino to that, so the Arduino can say, turn on the main 5 volts or not. So it can put out up to like 5 amps at 5 volts to run the Raspberry Pi. And I need enough current, because then I've got all that USB stuff that's running off the Raspberry Pi. So I have to make sure I have enough current to supply all that stuff too.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of putting it all together and figuring out, the proper way to, the proper sequence to make all this stuff work.
Okay. There was some talk at ROSCON this year about not using a Raspberry Pi for a ROS computer. There seems to be a lot of different versions out there. Another, Raspberry Pi, ROS Robot. But the idea with using the Raspberry Pi is that it's very low cost, and it's an ARM processor. So if you want to use something like in the NVIDIA series, you can switch over to that. I didn't know, obviously there are limitations to the Raspberry Pi, but so far it's worked okay for me for the base computer. Obviously, like the machine learning pipeline, those other things are too big for the Raspberry Pi, but I don't, just wanted to pass that along, is that we're not limited to just the Raspberry Pi, that it fits the whole ARM processor, or you can go to like a ATX little box.
And so what was the most commented on alternative? Was it like a Jetson?
No, there were like 3 other talks of people using ROS on Raspberry Pi, but I don't know if it was just kind of the point where people don't take it seriously or they think it's like a hacky if they see it running on a Raspberry Pi. But I've ran full-size vehicles, cars, haul trucks, tractors on a processor that's 1/8 of the power of the Raspberry Pi. So for me to use Raspberry Pi, I'm like, it's completely makes sense. But you're definitely limited. Like, you can only do basic functionality with the Raspberry Pi, right? You're not going to do any of the machine learning. You're not going to do any of that stuff with it. This is basically just a vehicle controller. And from my paradigm, when we wanted to do vision, we put on a vision processor board that was good at that task. So for me, adding another board to do those tasks is not unusual, but maybe that's just from my frame of reference and maybe not the best way to do that. But we have other options for boards you can put down.
I was thinking of getting the Jetson and the camera that they were recommending for another robot, just to test it out and just to see what it was like. I think I'd shared it last week or the week before. It did look pretty cool. But again, I was just thinking like you are, it would be for vision, and it would be on top of what's already, the base computer, because the Ubiquiti build, is really nice from my perspective.
Okay.
So I'm sticking with Ubiquiti. Whatever they use, that's what I'm using.
Okay. And then the other thing that I was really impressed with, Ben Nelson down in Australia is doing a lot of work with the Z camera and the TX2. And the fact that he doesn't have enough processing power to do vision with a stereo camera with the TX2 was very insightful. So,
what does the TX2 go for?
TX2s are now probably $400 or $500, and the Xavier is $700.
Wow.
So
and you can't get it done.
We can't get it done. And Xavier is the top of the line NVIDIA processor.
But again, I'll bring up the point that a TX2 is really no faster than a Raspberry Pi if you're just using the ARM processor on it. Basically it's the same. They're both both quad core ARM processors on the thing. The TX2, where it comes in, is the fact that it's got that big GPU on there. But if you're not using the GPU for anything, then the TX2 is really no faster than the Raspberry Pi. Now, if you go to the Xavier, the real Xavier, I think it's got an 8-core, so it might be, twice the power of a Raspberry Pi. But just because it's from NVIDIA doesn't mean that it's the base processor is that much more powerful. At least that's the way it looks to me. So, and I do have the Jetson Nano that I bought just because it seemed like it was a good deal, and that also has a quad core, and I think it's got 4 gigabytes of RAM on it. So comparing that to the Raspberry Pis, I bought that just before they came out with the Raspberry Pi 4, where I could go get 4 gigabytes of RAM. So I bought that thinking that was going to be, at the time, the Jetson Nano was faster than the Raspberry Pis, but now they came out with the Raspberry Pi 4. Probably the Raspberry Pi 4 might actually be a little faster than the Jetson Nano is. So you got to kind of look at this stuff and, don't make the assumption that just because it's from NVIDIA or because of the fact that it has a GPU is going to solve all your problems, because if you're not using that GPU for anything, it's really not doing you any good. And my other thought was, you're saying, well, you can go to a different processor. My philosophy all along has been that I'm just going to have whatever my high level processor is just a compute engine that's got, say at minimum, like one Ethernet and one USB coming out of it. And I can just unplug that and say, plug in a laptop or plug in like a, like one of the mini box type single board computers, whatever you want, because it's just simply a black box that runs your ROS, and it doesn't matter if it's an ARM or a x86 or whatever. So that way, your actual low level machine control is done on whatever your low level controller is, whether you have an Arduino or a Teensy, or in my case that ST micro eval board. So all that stuff is done at a certain level. You just got one connection back up to your main controller, your main black box device. So if I decide I don't want a Raspberry Pi, I just unplug that, plug it into a laptop, and there you can go anywhere from like an i3 up to an i7. And they probably even got bigger, fancier ones now that I lost track of all that. I quit trying to chase the big, fast gaming machines and all that. So that's just another thing. I know you guys are using your GPIO on your Raspberry Pi to connect relays and stuff like that. So keep in mind, if you want to swap that out, that if you've got functionality built right into that, it makes it harder to. So you can't just unplug that and plug your laptop in, because your laptop doesn't have any way to run that extra stuff. Although you do still have the option, if you've got the Raspberry Pi is built in there, you can add, then on top of that, plug a laptop computer in over Ethernet, so you can have, just add more processing power instead of swapping it out, just add more on top of it. So that's another solution to do on that. And as far as the best processor to use, I haven't figured that out yet. So I just know that I had my Raspberry Pi on there and had all my sensors running, and it seemed to be keeping up with just the sensors, but I didn't have any of the navigation stuff running at the time. So when I get around to loading all that up, then I'll see how much of that it can do, and possibly I could add a second Raspberry Pi to do the navigation part, or again, if I need to, I just yank it out and put my laptop back in there. So it's just a matter of, you go until it doesn't work, and then you have to decide what to do on beyond that. So.
Okay. That was a good insight. I do like the $35 price tag. If I blow something up, it seems to be really reasonable just to swap out. But just to float that out there, we're not limited on the Raspberry Pi. If there's other problems or limitations, we definitely can go.
Go until it doesn't work. That's what I heard the counsel from Obi-Wan Kenobi is.
Yes. Keep pushing it. Keep loading it.
So speaking of the Roscon talks, did you hear any estimate on when they're going to release the videos for those?
It's usually like 2 weeks, but they'll post on Discourse, but I haven't heard yet.
Okay.
Really good talks, and it takes some time to go through and rebuild the code and go through the presentations, but very interesting stuff coming down the line. Security, so robustness, security, kind of that whole commercialization pipeline. There were a few talks about that, just hardening the system, over-the-air updates. How do we handle all of that in a ROS-centric way?
In Vegas for 2020 or still TBD?
TBD, yep. We won't know until they book the conference, but that would be fun. That would be awesome. North America we're pretty much guaranteed North America. We just don't know yet. But definitely, if you can make it, let's go there. Let's work it out.
Yeah, so you will probably hear before I do, but just let us know what dates and where you're staying.
Okay, I got a place booked for Vegas already, but I can still cancel it. I just did it. We'll see when the dates are when it comes out.
Well, you could Airbnb a place that will accommodate 3 or 4 people.
Yep, I got a 3-bedroom place on hold.
Yeah, there you go. You're a
Sleep
planner.
state. we can pile everybody in. I like the Airbnb. That's fun too. That's a good idea.
Do they allow robots there?
To pile in the robots there.
Do they allow you to have robots in your place you're staying? You know, some places you say no pets. Now they're going to have to start saying no robots to
You're gonna have to say
keep that
that.
stuff out.
I haven't seen a place that says no robots yet. So I'm sure they're coming. And I haven't heard about the AgBot competition. I don't know. There's been some talk that they're not going to have it this year at Purdue. So that's a fun event. That's a more hands-on event, but we'll have to come up with another place to go for a robot competition this year if they don't have that one.
And what's the why as to not having it?
That's a good question. I don't know yet.
Okay. Well, I'm Tuesday night. There's a Robotniks, I think, is the name of the company. It's got an $80 million contract with NASA. They're doing a local talk about what they're doing. I think the individual who presented a couple of weeks ago about the crater exploring robot that he was working on, my suspicion is there's a connection there. So it'll be interesting to see what they have to do. The $80 million was with this outfit to build robots to help with what do you call it when you go and land and live on the moon with the
lunar base.
Yeah, the creation of that lunar base. So
yeah, they're going to need farming. I still have friends at NASA that do hydroponic growing for extended flights and for lunar Mars missions.
what city do they operate out of?
Down in Cocoa Beach. They're down in the Cape.
Cool. Yeah, that would be an interesting gig. Okay, guys. Well, have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. See you later.